Right, good morning everyone. Welcome to the 29th of August 2019 Regulatory and Hearings Committee meeting. We are here to have two hearings, one on the solid waste bylaw and one on the prostitution bylaw. They are both bylaws that the Council is reviewing. We do have a quorum, that's nice to see. Thank you for those who are attending. We will do apologies first. I do have apologies from the Deputy Mayor, but it's usually just for lateness, or is it for the full day? If it's full day, okay. So apologies from Deputy Mayor. Any other apologies? Oh, and apologies from Councillor Taylor. That's all. I'll move the apologies be received, seconded by Councillor Tooman. All those in favour? Any against? That's carried. Right, I can confirm that the agenda is as received and there are no changes, so I'll move the agenda be received, seconded by Councillor Casson. All those in favour? Any against? That's carried. Any declarations of interest? Yes, Mangai James.
And that's just with, I know one of the submitters that's presenting today, just the flag, Simon Drum, 1030.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so we've got just one person speaking on the first one, the solid waste bylaw. So we're, just for members of the public and our online viewers, we are doing our very best to go paperless. So we have devices in front of us with all of the submissions on. So committee members, we're turning to page 5, although the hearing schedule is on page 44, on the last page on diligent. I will remind you, members of the committee, that we are here to listen. We are not here to deliberate, and we are certainly not here to interrogate the members of the public speaking to us today. I will remind you again and talk a little bit about that when we get to the prostitution bylaw review hearings as well. But in the first instance, we have Tony McLaughlin up, who's speaking on the solid waste bylaw. Tony is not here. No. Okay. He was told 9:35, wasn't he? Yes. We've got a couple of minutes. At the end of the process, as I always do, we'll get staff to the table and we will talk about, have questions on the submission analysis report only, not on the substantive issue. Then we'll do around the table. Anything that you hear from submissions, we can, and you want information brought back to the deliberations report. And I'll do that for both processes today, and that's what we have done this entire term in this committee. We'll just... Okay, all right. Okay. Well, look, the submitter's not here, so we may as well dispose of this one then. No pun intended. So, where are our staff? Hello, do you want to come to the table? It's you? So, committee members, we're on page 5. We can take the report as read. Are there any questions for staff on the submissions report? There are none. There are, Councillor Pascoe?
I've got some thoughts that I would
no thoughts, just questions.
Like the staff to bring back in their, I'm not intending to debate.
Yes, okay,
I just have, well, they probably are questions, but they are areas that I'd like the staff report when it comes back to council.
Put on the list,
to actually be on the list.
Yep.
So that's permissible,
yes,
Chair?
It is.
Okay, all right. And I'm reflecting on the submissions. And there was certainly one very good submission from a resident about how he might, given his age and so forth, get his bin to the curbside. So I'd like to see in the report how we might help, how we'll get messages out to residents who are in that similar situation, and how we might, how the organisation might put into place the necessary help that might be needed to assist those residents.
as part of what we're, with the new service and with our contractor, we have a number already built in of what we call assisted services.
Yes,
So
yeah,
we'll be-
I remember this coming up,
so,
but I'd like to.
So we'll be putting a process together
Yep.
around how that's actually rolled out. And
Okay, and as a second part to that, I'd also like to know what you think the annual cost might be of that assisted service, because presumably somebody from council going round and helping get those bins out to the curbside will involve some sort of cost, and that cost will presumably be an annual ongoing cost.
there is within the contract sum, a cost built in for a set number of assisted services already. So I don't have those figures, but
Okay, so can you identify that cost and bring it back in the
Yes.
report?
Yep.
That way, I think it will give hopefully some degree of confidence to those residents who are concerned about how they might do that. And the second area is perhaps to include in the report how we're engaging with landlords and owners in high density units, flats, whatever, where there's minimal curbside, where there's minimal space on the curb to put all of the bins and bags and so forth, that will need to be taken away. And I know in the earlier submissions we talked about, and some landlords were quite happy to have spaces within the property where these could be collected. So if we can get some sort of transparency around how we're actually going to do that and what engagement we've had and what the feedback's been back from some of those landlords and body corporates, I think would be the right area of engagement where the units are actually owned by individuals within the body corporate. That's all from me, Chair.
Questions, so thank you very much for that. I'll move that the report be received and it will be considered and deliberated on the 17th of September. So I'm moving the staff recommendation on page 5, seconded by Councillor Tooman. Any debate? All those in favour? Any against? That's carried. Okay, right, we're moving now on to page 30. This is the hearings for the prostitution bylaw review. Now, just a reminder, committee members, this is obviously a sensitive subject for the public, and the people that are speaking to us today have the right to be heard. And we are here to listen. We aren't here to interrogate the members of the public, so I ask that you keep that in mind. I just wanted to just quickly, for some, possibly the new members, talk about keeping, well actually all members, keeping an open mind, and you have to demonstrate that as well and show that you're demonstrating that. The risk, of course, is a judicial review. Now, what a judicial review can do is, in the process, means that a high court will determine whether council has followed a fair and equitable process. So we need to keep that in mind when we are having these hearings, and I know that you do that. Right, so now you have the hearing schedule on the back of the diligent agenda and here as well. And our first submitter is Dame Catherine Healy, and she's speaking on behalf of the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective. And the submission, committee members, is under Bridie Sweetman. So if you click that link, her submission will come up. So Dame Catherine, are you here? Hello, good morning. So you have, oh, sorry, you have just up here, yeah. So Dame Catherine, you have 10 minutes to present. It would be good if you could leave a couple of those minutes for questions, but it is your time, just over there, yeah. It is your time to talk, so you can use that time as you like. The bell will go at 9 minutes, indicating that you need to wind up.
Thank you. I'm here to address two issues, essentially. My role as National Coordinator of the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective ensures that I have contact with sex workers throughout New Zealand. It's also an international role, and I have experience in terms of law and policy I'm also a founding member and an ex-sex worker. It astounds me actually to see that this bylaw is representing soliciting legislation. So I would say to you that we believe very strongly that it's repugnant to the Prostitution Reform Act of 2003. In 2003, Parliament decided to repeal the soliciting legislation, 1981, Summary Offences Act. It allowed for a $200 fine, and many of us as sex workers experienced the reality of that soliciting legislation. And we described the harm it caused. Now, I know that in Hamilton, we haven't had a street-based sex worker population. We only have a few street-based sex worker populations to date in New Zealand, and Hamilton has never had one. So in a certain way, I'm talking theoretically to you, but I'm also appealing that you not go down this path again and have this in your bylaw. When sex workers go about their daily lives, people identify them, and it used to happen when we had the old soliciting legislation. One of the last soliciting prosecutions occurred when a sex worker was walking down Cuba Street in Wellington going to visit a friend, and a policeman entrapped her. And so it's that kind of thing that we worry about. We worry that you might have that situation arise in Hamilton. What you're suggesting in your bylaw, in fact, what you have in your bylaw is the potential to fine someone $20,000 for soliciting. It's unlikely that we're ever going to see the emergence of a street-based sex worker population in Hamilton. In Wellington, they've died off. You know, people have moved indoors. You know, they've had the option to do that since the Prostitution Reform Act. And we have a small population in Auckland, and it's shrinking. And we certainly have had our issues in Christchurch. And in Christchurch in particular, we've had a council consider having regulations around street-based sex work, and they've backed off that, and they've responded to our collaborative approach, which is us, NZPC, working with the police, working with other help agencies like the Salvation Army, working with those sex workers who are creating situations with residents. And it's been incredibly effective, and you can check with, I imagine, your peers in Christchurch City Council, if, you know, to validate my statement there. So I'm flagging the soliciting part of the bylaw. I also want to make a plea for those sex workers who are working here in Hamilton indoors. We believe that the majority of those sex workers are forced to work in breach of the bylaw, and of course that introduces harm. We know that the compliance officer goes out, makes an appointment, pretending to be a client, and it, you know, that's an inappropriate situation in the first instance, and goes out to meet them, and then explains that they're working in breach of the bylaw. That bylaw was introduced in 2007, and I think the times were rich with hysteria. We'd just passed the legislation. There was a strong lobby group that was talking about that, you know, there'd be a whole surge in the number of brothels, the number of sex workers, and, you know, residents and people understandably thought, gosh, the sky is going to fall in if we allow a more extensive approach to where sex workers can work from. But I know that there are very few situations that have popped up for you, apart from the compliance, having to go out to find those sex workers who are working in breach of the bylaw. I'm sure those sex workers aren't causing harm in their neighbourhoods or the situations where they're working from. So that would be my second plea, that you look at the restrictions that you have and consider extending them. I appreciate that many submitters probably are talking in theory, like I've had to talk in theory today about imaginary sex workers working on the streets of Hamilton. And I imagine some of those submitters cannot describe a realistic situation they've encountered with a sex worker. They're not coming into contact with them knowingly. They're not experiencing situations that are creating harm. But should they experience situations that caused a nuisance, we know that there's a whole raft of legislation already in existence to police those sorts of behaviours. So that's my second plea, and I thank you for allowing me to address this council.
Thank you, Dame Catherine. I just have a couple of questions for you. You mentioned that, please correct me if I'm wrong, that street-based workers are are declining in areas where they are allowed to work on the street. So, but isn't your submission, because the proposed bylaw is not allowing street-based work, isn't your submission advocating for that in spite of it dropping in other centres?
Yes.
Can you explain
Yes,
that to me?
definitely street-based sex work is declining, and it's because people have more options generally. Where there's homelessness, obviously that puts a stress there for those sex workers, not having a place necessarily to work from. So, yes, the submission is making a plea that you allow for street-based sex work, because the concern is that sex workers who are going about their daily lives may be identified in Hamilton as actually working from the street. In fact, conflating the idea that, they're going about their daily life, and somebody might say, look, she's working. She's working on the street. In fact, she might just be going shopping. So, there is a theoretical situation. We used to have that situation in Wellington and other cities. Sex workers had been approached by the police, as it was then, because there was confusion about them working. If you follow that argument, that's a concern.
I do understand what you're saying now. Dame Catherine, has that happened in Hamilton, where a worker has been approached on the street and...
I don't think so, but I couldn't... I think maybe... I think you might have information, the officials might have information in that regard. Okay, I understand really clearly what you're advocating now for. And my last question to you is, can you point me to what part of the Prostitution Reform Act you're saying that we're in breach of? Yes. Well, I'm not a lawyer, and in the absence of our in-house lawyer and the external lawyers who submitted a submission, they talk about it being repugnant to the Prostitution Reform Act. Specifically, I can't cite, but the Act itself talks about, it has the aims of the Act, and it talks about repealing the soliciting legislation. So that legislation was repealed.
Yeah, okay, all right. We'll just go to two further questions. Mayor Andrew?
Yep. Your direction is about human rights, from what I'm gathering, that your submission is. If there's a shop that does, say, a nail salon or a hairdresser or a beauty therapist, they rent a shop, and then they're not allowed to go outside their shop and sell their service on the street. And if they do, they also get a large fine, because that's how it works. So what's the difference here?
Well, I think the difference is Parliament debated this and repealed the legislation because they identified that there was an inappropriate amount of harm. There's stigma that's associated with sex work. And there were other concerns in relation to public health as well. And so they identified that the approach to support, both, the concerns that the public have and the sex workers themselves, that wasn't to have a punitive approach. In terms of a parallel between what is the difference, I think I'm not the person to answer that. I think in a different framework.
Just one last question. If there's a stigma attached, why would you want to sell on the street?
Well, the motivations for sex work, we have done considerable research. I wasn't aware I had to talk to this, but
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to put you in a corner, and if you're
Yes.
not an expert to answer,
I have
totally
been
understand.
involved in research, and the motivations for people becoming sex workers are clearly there, and people talk about the primary reason for becoming a sex worker is to pay household bills. And our experience of people who are street-based sex workers is that they're often whakawahine, Māori, transgender, and it's been traditionally very difficult for that population to find work inside brothels, managed brothels, and work per se, work in general. So, there's a long history about why people become street-based sex workers and, who they are in terms of ethnicity. And predominantly what I'm talking to and what could happen here in theory, it would be more likely that Māori, whakawahine, transgender sex workers would be the ones who would be the most vulnerable to enforcement of this law.
Thank you.
Chair. Dan Catton, you mentioned that in Hamilton here, allegedly, a compliance officer will make an appointment with a sex worker, turn up at the premises, and then advise them that they're in breach of the bylaw. Have there been any prosecutions in Hamilton, as far as you're aware?
I'm not aware of any prosecutions, but I'm sure the officials would have information in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Time to come and submit to us today. Thank you. Right, our next submitter is Bob McCoskrie. Good morning, Bob. Welcome. Come down to the front here. Now the submission is on the back there, and Bob is representing Family First New Zealand. So Bob, you have 10 minutes. The bell will go at 9.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Firstly, can I acknowledge that you were given a hospital pass on this legislation. Parliament did not solve the problem. They just passed it to local councils to try and deal with the fallout. And so I just acknowledge that it has been difficult for local councils throughout New Zealand. The second thing is that Hamilton has set the benchmark, and I would encourage you to maintain it. And it is a model for the rest of New Zealand. As you'll see in our submission, we support the current bylaw completely. It keeps brothels out of sensitive areas. That was the intent of the law. That was a statement from the then Minister of Justice, the Honourable Phil Goff. The buffer zone is vital. In fact, we would encourage the buffer zone to be slightly greater, but 100 metres is still good. We endorse the fact that you're keeping brothels out of the CBD, and we support the fact that you're restricting street prostitutions. And I heard earlier a comment about Christchurch. No, it's not working. It's a disaster. You talk to families who are involved in some of those streets where it's happening. We've been contacted by families who operate out of the back of their property because at the front of their property all they can hear is the disturbances around street prostitution. I live in Manurewa. South Mall's just down the road. I drive through Hunters Corner. You see the evidence of street prostitution, and it's not pretty for families to have to encounter that type of thing. And the reason you haven't had problems in Hamilton is because the restrictions are right. You've got a good balance. In terms of some of the criticisms that I have read of your bylaw, I'd just like to tackle a couple of those. Firstly, your bylaw is consistent with the purpose of law reform. You haven't made it illegal. You have allowed it, but you've set clear restrictions. That is not inconsistent with the Bill of Rights. And you haven't criminalised it. You have simply set guidelines and safeguards. It is not punitive. The bylaw does not endorse vulnerability, as some will claim. In fact, prostitution exploits vulnerable people. And finally, there was mention about stigma. Yes, there is stigma, and it's for good reason, because we believe prostitution exploits already vulnerable people. And we should be encouraging people to get out of the industry. We should have support mechanisms in place. So just finally, on this issue, you are dealing with competing rights, and we would plead with you to fall in favour of protecting the community, of protecting families, and of protecting children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Are there any questions from the committee? There are no questions. Thank you very much for your submission. Right, our next speakers up are Bert and Robin Jackson from the Voice Waikato Network, or just Robin. Good morning, Robin. How are you? You're very familiar with our process, so you can start when you're ready.
Yes, good morning. My apologies from Bert. He did want to be here. He planned to be here, but I'm on a bit earlier than we thought. So good morning to the Mayor, councillors, and everyone present. Our Voice Waikato written submission emphasises a public wish to have residential areas protected from the sex trade and to have the ban on public soliciting maintained. Now, we want to critique two of the arguments of the prostitution lobby which underlie their request for the prostitution bylaw to be repealed. The first is their claim that the bylaw contravenes the purpose of the Prostitution Reform Act. They say the purpose of the Act was to free prostitution from most restrictions and to give prostitutes various protections. It's true, a main purpose of the Act was to decriminalise prostitution, but Hamilton's bylaw does not contravene it. Another of the Act's purposes was to empower local authorities to regulate the location of brothels. This was specifically because Parliament recognised there are places, many places, where the public don't want brothels. For instance, as the Honourable Phil Goff said at the time, most people wouldn't want them in residential areas or adjacent to schools or preschools. Why do so many of the public not want brothels there? It is partly because of the nuisance issues caused by some particular brothels, but it's also because people think the selling and buying of sexuality, the most richly personal and intimate aspect of human nature, undermines human dignity. They particularly do not want this cheapening influence intruding into the milieu in which their children and grandchildren are growing up. That is also the reason for the ban on public soliciting, which our children could otherwise see when they come into town. We're fed up, absolutely fed up with having our children and grandchildren's innocence more and more and earlier compromised by sleaze. I hear emotive words from these people, but we're emotive too. We feel strongly about this. We're tired of having to explain so soon to them things which should have waited until later years. Several aspects of current society are causing this, but the increased prominence of prostitution is one of them. Our bans on residential areas, prostitution and public soliciting are protections we want to keep. They do not contravene the Prostitution Reform Act. They uphold the public protection purpose of it. Secondly, we reject the notion, so fundamental to the sex trade's arguments against the bylaw, that prostitution is now a job like any other. Section 3 of the Prostitution Reform Act specifically says it is, to quote, not intended to endorse or morally sanction prostitution or its use. Despite the Act's use of the term sex workers, its focus was on removing legal restrictions, not establishing a new occupation. That is for good reason. We believe the public generally do not think prostitution ranks alongside other activities as a job they want our young people to aspire to. Once again, I thank this council. Some of them were on it back in that day, that they had the braveness to set our really good prostitution bylaw in place. And I'm asking today, we are asking as Voice Waikato and the people we represent, that you maintain the prostitution bylaw as it is. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Robin. There a question from Mangai James.
Kia ora, Robin. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question was just around if you could share what your thoughts and expectations of residential areas. You know, what does that look like in your view?
You mean currently as it is, that the prostitution brothels aren't allowed and of any size aren't allowed in our...
You spoke of residential areas and sensitive area, you know, so a lot of sensitive sites being residential areas, and the well-being of the rights of those who live in residential areas.
Yeah.
So I suppose I'm just trying to get a gauge on what your thoughts or what's your picture of what a residential area is, noting that there are different kind of residential areas in the city.
Well, they're where families and children are. They're where grandparents and old people are. They're where single people are living on their own. They're where homes are. I'm not quite sure what your question is. I read all the submissions from back in 2007, and there were just a huge variety of them from different people who didn't want brothels in the residential areas, where people live, where families are, children are raised, where families are.
No, I'll reframe my question, my apologies. Just around, do you expect cars to be on the road parked off-site? Do you see residential areas also accommodating somebody working on their panel beating their car in the yard? I suppose what I'm trying to get is the mixture of activities that are provided for in residential activities.
Yeah, so you're saying
areas.
home businesses really, aren't you?
Well,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily, there's those who tinker, so I'm just trying to get a gauge
well, I don't
from-
have any problem with those who tinker, but when you're talking about brothels, that's not tinkering, is it? I mean, you might get to hear a few stories. I've read them, and one of the reasons, the first reason we even got involved in this was because a woman over in Chartwell had two prostitutes, which was classed as, which would be classed as a small brothel, working out of the house next door to her. Her family moved out. There were cars lined up, and there were men all over the place. And so we got ourselves on the front page of the Waikato Times supporting this woman, because that's not really what a residential area is meant for.
Robin, we'll see if we can get a clearer question
Yeah, I'll
from
try.
Mangai James.
The main thing is I'm trying to get from your perspective, what does living in a safe residential area look like? And if it doesn't have,
What does it include and what doesn't it include?
So beyond just living at a home and possibly a school, what else do you envisage being in residential areas? More, what do you want to see rather than what you don't want to see? Is that a question?
Well, I'm involved very much in a large trust in the Norton area of Hamilton. We work there. I think it's marvellous that there are community centres in residential areas. There are shop dairies, there are those kind of things. I still can't quite see what you're saying. I mean, I'm not opposed. I had a home business in a residential area myself, a health business. That's fine. That didn't affect anybody there, so I'm not quite sure what you're meaning. Are you meaning that what you're trying to say is perhaps a small brothel operating in a residential area, if it isn't seen, would be okay? Is that what you're trying to say?
Madam Chair, no, I wasn't saying that. I was just trying to get an idea what
sort of person I was and what I think of
far
how
from
my
that.
life...
Far from that.
Sorry, I think
Yeah.
help here. You're very clear on your submission that you say that there should be a ban on residential area brothels.
Yes.
So that
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah. We don't think-
anything outside of that is subjective.
And I think you'll find a majority of Hamilton, well, I better be careful what I say, but a good number of Hamilton residents do not believe that selling sex in the suburbs is okay, for a good number of reasons, which some of I've mentioned. Did you read our submission? Yeah, okay.
Okay, so thanks, Mungo James. I just have one question, Robin. The Voice Waikato, how many members or how many people does that represent?
Well, when we first started it, we represented a good number of people. None of them have contacted us to say they want to be taken off our representation. So it's a very loose-knit group of people who want us to speak to them for them on certain...
Can you give me a rough just...
I can't really.
No,
answer,
okay,
sorry,
all right.
no.
No, that's all. Thank you very much for your submission, Robin. Thank you. Okay, our next submitter is Paula Salisbury. Salisbury, sorry. Mothers for Safe Suburbs. No, she's not here. Okay. Pat Gregory, I know you're here. Good morning. Nice to see you. Committee members, Pat is speaking on it as an individual, so she has 5 minutes to address the committee.
Good morning, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I believe in the old maxim, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Our prostitution bylaw has and is working very well. It ain't broke, it doesn't need fixing. Our city has prostitution and all that goes with it under control, and I would like to see it stay that way. I can speak from personal experience what it's like to have a brothel come into an area that had previously been brothel-free, as I had one set up right next door to me. And I'm well able to tell you what it was like and how it affected our street in particular, and no doubt how it will affect any other street in our city if the bylaw is changed and brothels are allowed to be set up in suburban streets. The whole ethos of our street changed when the brothel was set up. One of the first things that happened was that parents could not let their children play outside as they did not want them exposed to or in danger from men who would wander up and down waiting for their appointment. Not to mention the extra traffic that this business generated. The family opposite the brothel sold up as they had a little one, and they had another one on the way, and they could no longer let their little girl play outside because they were afraid for her safety, and they did not feel they could continue living under the constant threat from the house across the road. We had men ring our doorbell on more than one occasion late at night because they'd got the wrong house. I obviously don't have time to go into much detail in 5 minutes, but I can tell you that I was often concerned for my safety because we would sometimes hear raised voices and altercations coming from next door. One night we heard things being thrown about and smashed. It wasn't nice, and we were definitely considering moving when one night the occupants did a midnight flit and they were simply gone next day. And we were very pleased, I can tell you. I know that the Prostitutes Collective will tell you that their human rights are being eroded, but what about the rights of the neighbours such as myself and the children that we are there to protect? We have rights too, and those rights are surely to be able to live safely and securely in a suburban street. It's not as if the prostitutes are being denied the opportunity to do their business. Areas have been set aside for their activities. excuse me, a timber mill, for instance, would not be allowed to set itself up in a suburban street, which is just as much a commercial business as the prostitution business considers itself to be. So why should the rules be changed on the basis of human rights for brothels? The bylaw that was made has worked in keeping our suburbs safe. I would like that to continue. So I end with what I started with. It ain't broke, so don't fix it. I say, leave the bylaw as it is.
Thank you very much, Pat, and done like a previous politician, under time. Any questions, committee members? There are no questions. Thank you very much for submitting today. Right, we move on to our next submitter who's just arrived. Roger Stratford, you're up. Good morning, Roger. You know the process as well. You've got 5 minutes and your submission is on our electronic devices here, so that's why we are looking at them.
Good morning, councillors, Mayor King, Chair Angela. You're going to hear many submissions today supporting the continuation of the present prostitution bylaw review as the law as it's written in 2009. Mine is going to be one of the few which advocates changes to that bylaw for a full review. In regards to escorts, I believe that development contributions could be collected from this community if they practice in a redeveloped Clawlands Bridge area in the pedestrian zone to welcome visitors into the city. This would engage with the river plan, which has been worked hard on in the past few years, encourage city growth and enhance the inner city nightlife experience for patrons. It would also discourage patrons from attending the pokies at the casino, and would also provide social entertainment for the evening. In terms of brothels, I believe that brothels themselves are a sensitive site, and that we should regard them as as such, and they should not be in industrial locations, because that gives them the negative image which have been portrayed as by other submitters. In terms of the jurisdiction of this council to make this invocation, I understand what the procedure was. That there was a question about whether the legality of the bylaw in terms of the human rights, the Civil Rights Bill of 1990. Someone could correct me on the name of that. That's the fact that the council is even considering the legality of its own policies and bylaws, to me, is very disturbing and undermines the integrity of the council procedures. I believe that council needs to look very closely at all the submissions and treat the few that are advocating for change equally to those, even if they're in the majority, who are supporting what's occurring at the moment with the current laws, which I believe are far too restrictive. The prostitution bylaw of 2009, to me, is reminiscent of the Jim Crow laws, and that it undermines the central government intentions under the 2002 Prostitution Law Reform Act. People may disagree with the Act, and there are some arguments, strong arguments for change in law area, but Parliament is the final arbiter for change to the Act. This Council must comply with the Act of Parliament 2002 Prostitution Law Reform Act. Questions?
Right, we've got a question. Councillor Casson.
Thank you, Roger. So you're saying in your submission here, escorts should welcome pedestrians into the CBD River Precinct from a councillor-postulated revamped Claughton's Bridge. What do you mean by that?
Well, what's happening? One of the councillors, Councillor Mark, had an idea about. I think what's currently happening now with the Claughton's Bridge is going some way to achieving that. They're bringing in pedestrian and cycle access over Claughton's Bridge, so it'll open up that area for much better for pedestrians in front of the casino and that sort of central city area. I just think that if the escorts could take up a spot there, for instance, they could make an application to this council for a spot on that bridge. They would then, and by some mechanism, whether the number of clients picked up that evening or whatever, they would pay development contributions, so the council the city would actually benefit. Development contributions would say, I don't know, $100 for each client, for instance.
Okay,
but it's picked up in that area.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Councillor Bunting.
Thank you for your submission. So, just so I'm clear, you're suggesting that we turn a part of the Claughton's Bridge into effectively a red light district. Is that right?
Oh no, Mark! I want the whole city.
No, the whole city.
No.
Okay. No. Being clear. Thank you.
If I don't, I see what you're getting at.
No, not at all. I'm just trying to understand your.
I don't think that we can simply designate any specific area, because that would invade the privacy of pedestrians walking past. This idea that the Hamilton City is going to be inundated with escorts is just ridiculous.
Okay.
This industry is a very private one, and I don't think that that's going to be a problem. If you have a look at the evidence, I don't think you will see that.
Okay,
thank you, Roger.
Thank you very much, Roger. Paula, you've just arrived. Mothers for Safe Suburbs, did you want to come down now? Thank you, sir. There's two of you submitting clearly today. Right down the front here, Paula. Right, your submission is on our electronic devices, that's why we're looking here. And you're representing an organisation, so you have 10 minutes to present. The bell will go at 9, but it'd be great if you could allow some time for questions as well. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Paula Salisbury. I'm representing Mothers for Safe Suburbs. We're a loose collective of mums and supporters who want Hamilton to be a great place for all children. We think the current prostitution bylaw is working well, and we think it's carefully worded too. The Prostitution Collective sees the bylaw as restricting its trade, but we mums see the bylaw in terms of freedom. You provide us as a council with beautiful playgrounds, books in the library and pleasant streets. We feel much safer enjoying these utilities with our children because of the bylaw. We feel much safer even in our homes. I want to briefly explore two facets to the safety. First, there's a physical, tangible side. This bylaw puts distance between children and families in the sex trade. I'm really grateful, actually, that my kids don't see prostitution, and so I don't have to be explaining these things to my 5-year-old. And that's where the bylaw links to a second aspect of safety, which is more about the social and the cultural side in our suburbs. By analogy, I think it's appropriate that council restricts this trade, because there are other activities that are perfectly legal but still have an ethical component to it. For example, I'm in Norton, we have a liquor store. It's legal for the liquor store to be there, but you still regulate its location. There are pokies at the local bar. Again, it's legal for the pokies to be there, but you limit its location. We see this as the same kind of thing. I think prostitution depresses our community values, and that is why it's not just the physical safety that's important to me as a mother, but also the effect that it has on the environment in which my children live. Soliciting aside, I think there's a question that I can imagine would be raised to someone like me, and that is, how would you even know that prostitution in the suburbs exists? It's meant to be discreet. How would I be able to tell? Well, until recently, when we retrofitted the double glazing on our house, I could be in my bedroom and hear my neighbour coughing in her bedroom with both of our windows closed. We live in the suburbs, there's not a lot of privacy. If the back door is open, I can hear the domestics 3 houses down. And my son knows every car that drives up and down a cul-de-sac and can tell you its relative speed. We get to know our neighbours pretty well, and I think we would figure out soon enough what's going on in our neighbourhood. House prices being what they are, many of our members live in areas like Norton and Corshaw and Beta, and they would like me to tell you that we can imagine brothels taking root in areas such as ours. They want me to tell you that suburban prostitution and soliciting would undo the effects to build the community pride and values in those areas. And we've had comments like, that's the last thing we need, and people here are already at the bottom of the barrel. We have some specific concerns as well. I noted Objective 2 from our, you're not helpful. Objective 2 and the bylaw that talks about making it easier to police as well. We have a concern that it would be easier to hide underage prostitution and sex trafficking in the suburbs. And while we don't suggest that those things are happening in the sex trade here in Hamilton, it is possible. I think it would be a lot easier to do that in what looks like a normal home. We don't want our kids to be exposed to the drugs or the violence or the disputes that may go along with this trade. And we also don't want our kids to be exposed to the policing. It makes sense to us to have all of those activities concentrated in one area where everyone knows what's going on. There were some things out of the other submissions that I'd like to highlight for you. Some people have said prostitution is just like any other industry, and maybe we should be allowed to practice it anywhere, just like any other industry. Well, there are some industries that don't have an ethical component that are also limited. I'm not allowed to set up a workshop in my backyard and use heavy machinery. I'm not allowed to have a commercial kitchen without some kind of regulation. Same ways, I think it's perfectly okay for you to regulate prostitution, but also there is another aspect to this trade. I noticed in a submission challenging the legality of the bylaw, I'll quote this: high penalties are disproportionately victimise those who opt, sometimes due to factors beyond their control, street-based work. I think this was from the New Zealand AIDS Foundation. And later on, they said sex workers are often vulnerable people who in the course of business are at risk from abuse. I found this really revealing. I think that there's a tacit acknowledgement that prostitutes are vulnerable and that this is not a normal industry, and it's not the kind of thing I want around my kids. I would question an industry that requires people to break the law to do their jobs. And I think also that the AIDS Foundation said, because these people are vulnerable, they should be able to solicit on the streets because maybe bystanders will intervene. Just because people make a statement doesn't mean that the logic is sound. If you follow this logic, then the very act of prostitution should also be public, just in case people need to intervene. There was one other point that our members raised, and I thought this was really good. If you keep prostitution out of homes, you keep it out of the homes where children live. And prostitutes also have children. So for their sake, as well as for families like mine that have nothing to do with this industry, I think it's important that you protect all of the children in Hamilton. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paula. There are no questions from the committee. I just have one. Paula, can you tell me how many mothers you represent?
We're a loose collective. I think we're maybe too busy to keep roles.
Okay.
But we're yet to meet anyone who disagrees with us as well.
Okay, all right. Lovely. Thanks for taking the time to come and talk to us today.
Great, thank you.
Right, our next submitter is Simon Drum. Simon, are you here? No? Okay, Mark Dorsey? Yes, good morning, Mark. Can committee members, Mark's speaking as an individual, so he has 5 minutes to address us today. And you've seen how it all works, Mark, so you can start when you're ready.
Hi. Yep. So I put in my submission that thanks for the ban on solicitation. I have been solicited to in another country in the central business district. It's a very professional business by day, expensive hotel where we're at. It's, accredited by our international company. Night time turns into an entertainment district of quite an interesting kind. Second aspect I've put is I'm an engineer at this international sales company. We're security conscious for physical and mental well-being of all our staff, female as well as male. So my manager here in Hamilton is female. Her dotted line local manager in Melbourne, female. And where I just came back from last night is a town twice the size of Hamilton, another country. And I was in a nicer hotel this time, twice the height, half the amount of cigarette burns. But where I was last year, that hotel, go straight into the hotel, to your bedroom, nice rack of condoms. That's great, but it's not the type of environment that I'd necessarily want to invite my wife into to accompany me with international travel, if we do have the opportunity, or for my manager to be working on that project. And the same goes for if I have managers or staff or customers coming into Hamilton, I'd rather not to confront them with that type of activity. That type of activity, due to international anti-bribery corruption laws, we've got to steer clear of for our customers when we work on projects either overseas or locally. So I'd just like to keep that in mind when you're thinking of business people visiting as well. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. There are no questions. So
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Right, our next submitter is Lisa Lewis, and she's also speaking as an individual, so 5 minutes. Now, committee members, Lisa has someone who will be taking a video of her presentation, so I'm just letting you know that. Oh, is there something over? Oh, and there's also a presentation on overhead, which also, for anyone watching, also comes up on our screens in front of us.
So does it just play, or do I need to push a button? You'll need to scroll through it, so I'll put it up there. Yeah, so it's literally, and then how do you scroll? Just up and down with the mouse.
Oh, yeah.
No, we'll wait for you. Okay, when you're ready.
Hello, my name is Lisa Lewis, and I made this submission before deciding to stand for Mayor and Councillor in the upcoming elections. I'm here today to protest the current Hamilton City Council prostitution bylaw. On the Hamilton City Council website includes a PDF accessible to the public. The document is called Diversity Toolkit, and it was published in 2017. Now, on page 3, bear with me while I work this. On page 3, under definitions, oh, it's not scrolling, ma'am. Sorry. So we're just on page 1, but it won't scroll anymore. Oh, there, page 2. So what did you press?
You can just use this one on the side, the mouse.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. On page 3, under definitions, reads the following. Discrimination occurs when a person is treated unfairly or less favourably than another person in the same or similar circumstance under Human Rights Commission. This same document includes words from our current Mayor, Andrew King. In 2017, I quote his words, "The driver here is inclusiveness from the diversity toolkit." We want new Hamiltonians to feel included and part of our community, regardless of where they've come from, the faith they follow, or the experiences they have had during their life. I thank our current Mayor, Andrew King, for recognising inclusiveness as all part of diversity. In 1938, survey found that 26 out of 27 hotels and hostels refused to host Māori. Local politicians at the time suggested building a Māori-only hostel. This was segregation and discrimination. Fast forward to 2019, Hamilton City Council is currently voting a bylaw called the Prostitution Bylaw, where sex workers are now being segregated and discriminated. Some may ask, what relevance does the diversity toolkit have to our bylaw? We have Māori sex workers in Hamilton. I ask respectively from our Mayor Andrew King to please remember and consider your own words from 2017 as recorded by the Hamilton City Council Diversity Toolkit, that the driver of our city is you. You are driving the bus, and your words inclusive mean the following. Inclusiveness is the practice or policy of including people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalised, such as those who have disabilities and member of minority groups of age, profession, ethnicity or religion. To the current 12 councillors, I thank you for including me in my submission today. Andrew, Martin, Mark, James, Ryan, Gary, who's not here today, I don't think, Rob, Paula, Siggy, Dave, Angela and Jeff, and Leo. I thank you all for including me today and listening to what I have to say. I am here speaking at the Council's Regulatory Hearing Committee to present my case on behalf of 3,500 sex workers in New Zealand who are vulnerable today as we speak of someone that can use this bylaw against them when trying to work without reliance of our government, funding, dole, and provide for our families. The map on the Hamilton City Council website, which I'm going to display now. Oh, this is so, there we go. Allows sex workers to work on the west side of the bridge and river only in the city. This rule in the bylaw does not reflect fairness like any other business here in Hamilton. The rule does not reflect equality, diversity and breaches discrimination on the Hamilton City Council toolkit. Are you serious? No. No. No other profession, industry or business is restrictive in the same way like Hamilton City Council is restricting sex workers. By restricting sex workers, you're putting them at risk of exploitation and public health and harm. It is more expensive to rent in the city, and this resorts to sex workers having to pay for hotels. Some sex workers like myself have had to go to another city to work because of the restrictions placed on us here. Because there's not many options rent-wise, and the selective area on this map leaves sex workers option to only work at hotels. Don't you think with the current tourists visiting Hamilton and visiting and housing shortages, with hotels already full from working income, filling them with sex workers is not a smart idea? The fine for being breached is $20,000. There are two issues with this map: tourists wanting to visit our beautiful city and working income families needing homes, allowing sex workers the option to work on the east side without segregation. Sex work in 2019 is conducted and done behind closed doors. This is because CCTV cameras are everywhere, and in a day and age where social media and smartphones to protect the privacy of a client, it's done behind closed doors. All sex workers are aware that it's actually illegal for any person, not just a sex worker, under the Crimes Act and Offences Act 1981, where Leo Tallman and James Carson will be well aware of this of their past work in police work. Council do not need to use ratepayers' money to govern a police job. For parents worried about a sex worker living next door, I'd be more worried about a pedophile, as a parent myself, living next door, or a criminal barrister with murderers coming and going. Single mothers help pay bills as a business.
Okay, Lisa, I'm going to have to ask you to start wrapping up now.
Okay. You'll claim, Bob McCroskey and Robin Jackson, that you claim sex workers need protection. This bylaw does not protect sex workers. I think you've been watching too many movies. It's interesting that someone with a baby will say that she feels safe in her home, yet stating sex workers can't be given that same right. And how do you think a baby is made? Behind closed doors in a bedroom. They say that they don't want prostitutes to work in industrial areas or residential areas or on the streets or in brothels. Where are you saying we can do our legal job? Just want to read one more thing. If you're going to dish out $20,000 fines, how about we look at the Outback for how they dress and what they do? How can you determine that a sex worker should be fined $20,000? You look at a current bylaw here in Hamilton, $300 fine for having a fence too high. Under nuisance, the bylaw states that a bylaw shouldn't be a nuisance, maintain public health and safety, protect public from nuisance. Sex work is conducted behind closed doors. Read that. Bylaws should minimise the potential for offensive behaviour in public places. Yet look on the screen at a local bar.
Sorry, Lisa, we're well over time now.
Can I just say one more sentence?
One more sentence.
Yeah. People closest to the problem know how to solve the problem. I'm the only sex worker today speaking here. These people that have been talking, they don't actually know. They say we're sleazy. Does my outfit look sleazy today? They don't actually know what they're talking about. We want to be the inclusive city that Andrew King envisaged when he made a speech in 2017 in the Diversity Toolkit.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Any questions?
Are there any questions? There are no questions. Thank you for taking the time to present to us today.
Thank you for hearing me.
Right. Is it Jana Henry? Did I say that correctly? Janaya. Good morning, Janaya. You know the drill. It's 5 minutes. We'll just get sorted. It's under her name. Are you on the back page of the agenda, page 44? Okay, just hang on because, yeah. Amy will be able to, mine wasn't working either and she resynced it. Should have called out people. Is anyone else's links not working to submissions? Are you on Diligent or are you on, you're on, oh.
I can promise you I'll be very clear if we want to move forward.
Okay. You should have said something earlier. Okay. Good. All right. Okay, so Amy will help. Did you want to start now or do you want to?
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. We'll start now.
Dear councillors, because of your bylaw, sex workers who are working from their home because they are seen as too ugly to bring in business to an established brothel are not safe going to the police when they get abused by a client. If they report the abuser, they also report themselves, making them at risk of a $20,000 fine under your bylaw. Whether you had a bylaw or not, they would still be working from their home right now as you read this. Well, you're not reading it now, but that was the plan. As this will never ever stop, your bylaw just pushes a lawful profession back underground. Can they get a job in another profession? Absolutely. But why should they have to? If anyone wants to work in this or any lawful industry, they should be able to, just like you want to represent a community, you should be able to. This is one of the oldest professions. As of 2004, it has been a lawful profession, so they should have the right and freedom to choose like anybody and do so in the safety of their own home. What is a big deal in 2004? 100%. The law changed, allowing sex work in the country. I did not know what the impact would be of this law change. The lawmakers realised sex work was happening anyway, but keeping it illegal just meant more harm for sex workers, given they continue to work underground. So they gave controls to council to regulate via a bylaw. Because of this uncertainty, a plan B to prevent red light districts everywhere and brothels in every neighbourhood. Obviously, that hasn't been so. 15 years on and the sun still comes up the next day. So what is the fare for your council? What makes your city so special that it does not allow a sex worker to do lawful profession in their own home, when all of the other top 5 cities, such as Auckland, has no bylaw, Wellington has no bylaw, Tauranga and Christchurch allow it? Your district plan is already set up to regulate services, something a progressive city like those mentioned above get. Do you want to be a progressive city like them, or stay in the dark ages and keep this thing? Be brave and say no then. Say no to harmful men abusing little people in your community. These are genuine concerns for people you say you represent, and these concerns spin in the face of any perceived concerns from a small group of Walesers. Let sex work in the safety of their own homes, where they have better safety controls, can feel safe to go to police, feel safe to get health checks, including for HIV, which protects others, and register properly as self-employed with IRD, so they pay their way. A $20,000 fine is a genuine fare for them, which your council probably has never given and probably will never give, because it costs your ratepayers even more in legal staffing fees to collect it. The vulnerable sex worker does not know that or doesn't want to take that risk, so they live in the fear of this repercussion because they are just told, it's illegal and will get fined $20,000. This means the only effect of the bylaw in your community is harm. It is a discreet industry. There will not be signs up, let alone signs outside houses saying, come get some. It's just not going to happen. And we feel sorry for those Walesers out there trying to tell other people how they must live their life. No one would disagree that people are having sex in their houses all over Hamilton right now. As you read this, so what is the issue? Thank you very much, and if there are any questions, fire away.
I just have one question for clarification. When, two probably questions for clarification. Can you explain to me why you feel it's safer for a worker to be based on the street than work from home, if I've got that correct?
Yeah. The thing is, it's to get rid of that bylaw, because you're all probably wondering, what does she know? My mother was a sex worker, and it's not safe. When she is abused, she has nowhere to go at the end of the day. The $20,000 fine there, it's there to scare people. And don't tell me it's not. And those of you right now who are sitting here, be brave and do something about it. If anything, it's an opportunity for you to stand out from the rest of the candidates.
Okay, thank you. Last question, Councillor Cassam.
Your submission. I'm just going to ask you a question that I probably should have asked Lisa when she was up. Can you give us, since you're in the industry, can you give us a rough number of the amount of New Zealand citizen or resident sex workers there are in Hamilton working in the suburbs?
Sorry, just to refrain or re-explain, I'm not in the industry myself.
Oh, okay.
My mother was part of the industry.
Yeah.
And that is as far as my experience goes. However, I'm not prepared to talk any further in that space.
Okay.
Find out that question. 150? Okay, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for speaking to us today. Right, our final submitter on this item is Naomi Game. Naomi, are you here? No? Okay. All right, so that concludes our hearing process. Thank you very much to all the submitters who took time out of their busy schedules to come and present to us today. We're going to have staff come up to the table. We will, just for online viewers and submitters who are still with us, this committee isn't delegated to make a decision today. We are just here to listen to you. And but any questions from committee members on items and issues and concerns raised through submissions, they will now ask staff in a moment and for any information they want brought back that will inform the decision report, which will be made on the 17th of September at a council meeting. So over to staff. Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, you've done my job for me.
Okay.
We'll just take questions on the report and anything that you would like us to consider for inclusion in the 17th report.
Yep, all right, thank you. Mangai James.
Obviously not familiar with all the reporting that came through council leading up to the second consultation. So I'm hoping I'm not repeating too many questions here, seeking clarity. At the end of the bylaw, you got advisory note around brothels are subject to provisions of the bylaw and the Hamilton City or District Plan, and both are relevant. So my question is around home-based activities, occupations. And I've noted looking in the definition of the home base, it doesn't include brothels, prostitution, commercial. So I was just seeking clarity, is the alignment between the two documents, the bylaw and the Hamilton?
Those questions, sorry to interrupt Mangai James, but those questions are deliberation questions. We need, if you're asking if you want that information, it's either report on the analysis of the submissions.
Okay, sorry, because
But not on the substantive issue, because then we're entering into deliberation, and those questions need to be at the deliberation stage so the public can hear that.
Fair point.
Yeah.
If I can reframe my question was, has that information been presented to the committee of council prior to this consultation process?
There has been conversation about that. I'm happy to provide you with that information.
I'm not in that committee, so.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm happy to provide you with that information outside of this. Outside of this meeting, so that you do have that. But in terms of the decision that is getting made on the bylaw, we are talking about whether we're going to retain the current bylaw or amend the bylaw, and the change is the clause around solicitation. So in terms of locations, that's not part of the proposed changes in terms of the two different options that are on the table.
If I can, just one clarity question. So
Yeah.
if it's just, again, reporting back to the committee that I'm not sitting on, just around those permitted baseline activities, I think that's what's key I was trying to get to, is what is permitted, and the interaction between the two, the bylaw and the Hamilton plan.
Sure, I'll provide you with that information, and will that be part of the report? I can easily put something in. There we go.
Great. Thank you very much. Councillor Casson.
Madam Chair, what I'd like a little bit more information on is the amount of addresses our compliance guys have closed. I'm aware of 3, one in Puketi, one in Rototuna and one in Riverlea, that were closed by our compliance team. So just a number, maybe, of how many have been closed.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Pascoe.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got one question, and it probably is partially a response to Roger's submission, and that is when the current bylaw was initially approved, and I think that was back in 2004 or 5, did we have particular areas designated in the city where street solicitation may have been allowed? And if so, could that be included in the report that comes back to council on the 17th?
I don't know the answer to that question, but we will include it.
Yep. Yep.
There you go.
Okay,
So you'll bring that information back in that report?
Yeah, so could you bring that back in the report? So, and I just want to follow that through with Roger's submission. Yep. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Pascoe. Councillor McPherson?
Yeah, just following Rob's question, could we have just a brief summary of when this bylaw has been dealt with previously in terms of start off and update, and there was at least on some of the occasions, I don't know whether all occasions, there was a list of or numbers of those in favour and against the bylaw proposals, different proposals at the time. And I'm wondering if you could confirm whether Councillor Bunting's Access Hamilton strategy includes reference to this.
Dave, how far do you want that timeline to go back?
Oh, to 2004.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
2004.
So then
No, I
I
think
think
there's
two other times.
Okay.
two other, I think there's
Yep.
2 times in between.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify the question? So you want number of submitters or voting results?
Number of submitters.
Submitters,
yeah,
no
yeah,
problem.
yeah.
That's a good idea. Councillor
Yeah,
Toomey?
yeah, so whether,
Oh,
whether
sorry.
they're for or against the.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
Thank you.
Councillor Toomey?
Commentary in here on the Bill of Rights, but could we have something as to whether or not there have been any prosecutions around the country in breach of the Bill of Rights as far as prostitution is concerned?
We will include that.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll include that.
Good as gold.
Thank you, Councillor Toomey. Mayor Andrew?
Question I just want feedback on is under discrimination and segregation, and do we let other service providers or retailers sell their products on the street outside of their designated areas they're allowed to? And if they do that, what is the fine that they would be given, and is that different to what a prostitute who is soliciting outside of the business they're allowed to? What we understand it's 20,000. What is the fine for anyone else who would try and sell their services or retail on the street outside of their place of service? So is the fine discriminatory by being different, or is it the same? And do we is it the same rules for everybody, or are we discriminating against this group?
Yep, sure, we'll include that.
And yeah, so quite specific in that area. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mayor Andrew. Back to you, Councillor McPherson.
I forgot to also
Yeah.
ask for a brief summary, small paragraph or something about the occasion when the initial bylaw was, where council was taken to court over the initial bylaw for some sort of judicial review. I'm not quite sure the status of that was, but just a brief comment on that and what the outcome was.
Yeah, that's.
Thanks.
That's a good idea. I had that on my list. I've just got a couple of things. Dame Catherine mentioned, and as following on from, I think Councillor Casson raised it and Councillor Toomey, in terms of our compliance officers, she mentioned, and this might be my summary of them going undercover. Can you just give me some comment in the report about actually what legally we can and can't do, and actually what is our practice for ensuring compliance or checking compliance? So there was that issue. And also, just again, some commentary about how we have chosen the locations in the map. I'm making an assumption that it's based on industrial areas, but if you can have some comment around that. That was raised by Lisa Lewis in her submission. And that was all from me. Okay. That seems to be everything. Thank you very much. So with that, I will move the staff recommendation on page 30. That is to receive the report that we have heard the submissions, and a deliberations report will be considered and a decision made on the 17th of September, seconded by Councillor Toomey. Any debate? There is no debate. All those in favour say aye. Are there any against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending today. The meeting is closed.